Tonight, anti-oil extremists almost cause an oil spill. I'll tell you the details, the other guys won't. It's January 6th and you're watching the Ezra Levant Show.
Why should others go to jail when you're the biggest carbon consumer I know?
There's 8,500 customers here, and you won't give them an answer.
You come here once a year with a sign, and you feel morally superior.
The only thing I have to say to the government for why I publish it is because it's my bloody right to do so.
Anti-oil extremists aren't just protesting anymore. They're not just blocking roads or having sit-ins. On Sunday, they actively sabotaged an oil pipeline, tampering with the equipment, putting real lives in danger, not to mention risking oil spills they allegedly care about. We've shown you in the past how anti-oil protesters conduct themselves. Here are images from the mini riot on Burnaby Mountain, BC. They're violent, they're gross, they're well-paid and well-organized by US-based environmental lobbyists. They're hypocrites, of course. These protesters use oil and gas every day. They drive to the protests. They use oil and gas-based technologies like cell phones and Twitter. They jet to conferences. But on Sunday, their protests, which are often illegal, took a darker turn towards sabotage. Anti-oil extremists broke into a pumping station of an oil pipeline called Line 7 on the bottom left of the screen there. You see it in southwestern Ontario near Cambridge, and they turned the valve on the pipeline to shut it off. Now that pipeline, Line 7, carries 150,000 barrels of oil per day, and these extremists blocked it. Now, of course, the company that owns the pipeline, Enbridge, immediately detected that and took safety precautions and shut off the flow. But can you imagine if they didn't? And if the extremists involved weren't stopped? Can you imagine a 150,000 barrel per day pipeline being blocked by eco-saboteurs? And if the pipeline kept pumping and pumping and pumping against the blockage, could have broken, could have caused an oil spill. So-called anti-oil activists actually risking an oil spill. But you know they would have loved it. They'd have been famous. They'd have made the news. And they'd prove that oil was dangerous because they broke in, tampered with equipment, and made it dangerous. In other words, in this case, anti-oil criminals were threatening the environment and human safety, and the oil companies saved the environment. A bit ironic, don't you think? Now, there are hundreds of oil and gas pipelines in Canada and the US. Here's a map of just the biggest ones. There's also a pipe that goes into your own home, of course. I mean, how do you think you get natural gas for your stove or furnace? Pipes are the safest way to move those substances. I mean, this isn't shocking. This isn't new. Pipelines have been around since ancient days. Here's an ancient Roman aqueduct in Spain. Now, we're more high-tech now. We usually bury our pipelines now for safety and aesthetics, although these are quite beautiful. And we carry many more things in our pipelines now than just water. Pipelines are normal and safe. People without pipelines, they tend to live in squalor, like this image from Bangladesh. But throw $100 million of propaganda against pipelines, and some people will start to believe that the pipelines are a problem, not a solution to problems. But look again at that spider's web tangle of pipelines, hundreds of them, plus thousands of little ones not on the map. So how do these criminals choose which pipelines to tamper with? Because you see, it's not random. They don't tamper with pipelines that bring in OPEC oil to North America. For example, there's a huge pipeline from Portland, Maine to Montreal that brings in oil from OPEC tankers like these here. This pipeline disgorges these tankers unload their oil in Portland, and then it's piped up to Montreal, and it has done so since 1941. That's 75 years. There's the pipe right there. There has never been an eco-protest against it. Only pipelines with Canadian ethical oil in them are protested. Line 7, Line 9, Keystone XL Pipeline, Northern Gateway, Trans Mountain, Energy East. Do you see what's going on here? It's not politics, it's crime now, sabotage, industrial sabotage against Canada's key export, oil. It's so specific. Out of the hundreds of pipelines in North America, including ones bringing in OPEC conflict oil like that Portland to Montreal pipeline, none are touched, none are protested, none are blocked, except those originating from Canada. That's not random. There are calls by environmental extremists to block oil tanker ships, but only those off our west coast, where they would export Canadian oil. There's never a call to ban OPEC tankers bringing foreign oil to Canada on our east coast or the coast of Maine. That is not a coincidence. That is because all of these protests are foreign funded. It's a foreign campaign of economic sabotage, not just physical criminal sabotage. I've shown you a dozen times the Rockefeller Brother Fund's multi-million-dollar campaign to demonize Canadian oil. Just Canadian oil, not American oil, not OPEC oil. At what point do we as Canadians grow up a bit and realize that although the people on the ground doing the actual rioting or sabotage might be just stupid college kids, the people organizing them and funding them and directing them are deadly serious activists based in the US and elsewhere? At what point in time do we start to protect our national interests? Maybe even have an official inquiry into these eco-crimes? Well, don't hold your breath. As you know, Gerald Butts, the principal secretary to Justin Trudeau, he used to be the president of the World Wildlife Fund Canada, one of the very lobby groups that received huge foreign funding to oppose Canadian oil and gas. Just Canadian oil and gas. You can see his organization in that Rockefeller Brother Fund's campaign spreadsheet here as one of the front groups fighting against Canadian oil. Gerald Butts and Justin Trudeau would never actually commit a crime, like breaking into an oil pipeline pumping station and sabotaging it. They're much more refined. They just pass laws and issue orders to ban tankers, ban pipelines, and bring in carbon taxes, but only on Canadian-made oil, mind you. In fact, I'm surprised the foreign anti-oil lobby is still spending money on criminal sabotage. I mean, they've got their man in the Prime Minister's office now. Really, what do they need besides that? Stay with us. More after these words. Welcome back to the program. Well, yesterday Barack Obama made a very dramatic announcement about gun control. He's in the last year of his presidency, and he hasn't made any significant reforms yet, but he sure talks a good line. Well, last night he added some waterworks. Here, take a look at his speech.
And from every family who never imagined that their loved one would be taken from our lives by a bullet from a gun. Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad. And by the way, it happens on the streets of Chicago every day.
Well, there you have it. What a dramatic thespian. Is it real or is it just acting? Dramatic acting. Joining us now via Skype from California to talk about it is Ben Shapiro. He's the editor-in-chief of DailyWire.com. Hey, Ben, great to see you again, and congratulations on the Daily Wire. Look, I have no doubt that Barack Obama does care when kids are shot. I have no doubt, even though he's from a city where, gang murders have gone unabated by Democrats for decades. How much of this was real, and how much of this was political theatrics as propaganda?
It was 100% political theatrics. I mean, as far as does he care about when kids are shot? Of course he cares about when kids are shot. The difference is that I acknowledge he cares about when kids are shot, and he doesn't acknowledge that I care when kids are shot. The entire 40-minute routine that he did was based on the notion that if you disagree with him, it's because you don't care if kids get killed. And if you truly cared about kids like little Daniel, who was the son of the principal who introduced him, then you really would just endorse everything he wants to do on gun control. It was really sickening. And just put it this way, I'm very cynical about politicians. When politicians cry, to me, that's usually a sign that they're lying or they're pushing an agenda, especially in the middle of a pre-planned press conference. I mean, look at the people behind President Obama in this clip. All of these people are family members of people who have been shot. Are any of them crying? They're the actual family members. Are they crying? President Obama pauses, and you can hear the cameras clicking away. You can hear this wave of cameras clicking, and he pauses some more to let the cameras click. He's not trying to choke his way through this press conference. No, he's stopping. He waits for the cameras to hit him. President Obama is a professional at this. Does that mean that he doesn't care? No, but it means that he definitely ramped his emotions up specifically in order to push the notion that he is a deeply caring, wonderful individual, and he is the hero of his own story. Because remember, the only reason that he did this press conference in the first place was to push a bunch of gun control measures that are actually pretty minor in scope. I mean, if you contrast the gun control measures he pushed with the theatrics he used to push it, the contrast is pretty stunning, right? If you just watched the press conference and you didn't know what he was pushing, you'd imagine that he had just announced a full-scale gun confiscation when all that he really announced was that he was reinforcing federal law that already exists. So the idea here is not that he's going to do anything about guns. The idea here is that he's a good person, you're a bad person, and more specifically, he's a good person with the crowd that deeply cares about gun control, namely blacks, Hispanics, and single women who are college educated.
Yeah, I like using that phrase, virtue signaling. It's we see it here, we see it in global warming discussions, we see it with the Muslim migrants from Syria. It's not actually about solving things, it's about telegraphing how good a person you are. Now, I saw a funny tweet yesterday by a conservative. It was trolling the president. It said, you know, why did you spend all your political capital on Obamacare instead of doing this gun control? Pointing out what you said, that he actually hasn't done a lot of real things to limit gun control, other than scare a lot of Americans to buy firearms, thinking that maybe the ban will come. And firearm sales have never been higher than they are other than Obama. I'm not saying the measures he did introduce yesterday aren't important and aren't unconstitutional and shouldn't be rebutted, but it's pure theatrics. And it's a very good point you make, that the people who actually lost family members weren't crying, just the actor-in-chief. What do you say?
I agree with that. And as far as, I mean, look, the gun control crowd has to be angry with President Obama if they thought about it for more than 5 seconds, because he hasn't done anything. I mean, the truth is that I looked at these executive orders. There's the potential for massive abuse here. But the truth is that they are relatively minor in scope. They are cutting around the edges. They are not a full-scale, I'm going to go after all the guns routine. And the whole thing was just, virtue signaling is exactly the right phrase. The phrase I like to use is, this is unearned moral superiority. And the whole thing was just him proclaiming his own unearned moral superiority. I'm better than you, and everybody who disagrees with me just doesn't care enough. We don't have a sense of urgency. Sense of urgency to do what he wants. I mean, we all have a sense of urgency about stopping kids from getting killed, but what was amazing is that in the lead up to this, the principal from Sandy Hook who lost a kid, he was saying, as he introduced President Obama, that every crime involving a gun, we have the capacity to stop. That was pretty much an exact quote from that fellow. And I thought to myself, really, is that the case? But when you worship government as God, I guess that it is the case. And when you worship President Obama as a demigod, I guess that's the case too. I don't make my rights dependent on the emotional whims of a childish president, and that's what President Obama is.
Yeah, and you're right he's so narcissistic. I mean, listen, every politician with a Twitter feed has a lot of selfies in it, but I mean, this president has gone to new lengths with a selfie stick, posing, and historical moments, you know, of Rosa Parks on the bus. Actually, it was Barack Obama sitting in a bus in his commemorative tweet, for example. I think he's taking lessons from our new Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who actually was a high school drama teacher. I think Obama's raising his game of drama. I think it's narcissism. I think it's virtue signaling. I think it's revving up his base. But you point to something else in your latest column, and I think you were spot on, Ben. If someone is so emotionally available and sensitive as a crying commander-in-chief would be, that's disarming in a way, because it psychologically says, well, this guy couldn't be mean or bad. Look how sensitive he is. He really wouldn't trample your rights for a political agenda because he's acting out of all heart. It's actually a perfect tool of a tyrant to be a crying tyrant as opposed to a bullying, shouting tyrant, isn't it?
Oh, right. And one of the great disservices that we've done to our own historical knowledge is whenever there's a truly evil person in history, we attempt to turn them into a monster. And by monster, monsters don't exist. I mean, you can be a human monster, but the idea that there are people who just revel in the evil, that there are people who chortle like James Bond villains while they put the good guys over their tank of sharks. That's not the reality. The people who are going to come for your rights typically don't come jackboots first. They come, as Jonah Goldberg says, they come with smiley faces, and in this case, they come with tears. So President Obama doing this, you know, he in the middle of this press conference, he said that violating the Second Amendment was really not a big deal to him because, after all, we violate the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment all the time. And I thought to myself, well, there's a case if ever I heard one. of a guy who really doesn't care very much about that parchment Bill of Rights that has to give way in the face of the massive grief that this president feels. And you could see the media do this routine. I mean, over on CNN and MSNBC, they were having these masturbatory sessions where they were talking about how President Obama clearly felt this much pain. That means that we have to sacrifice our rights. And it's the whole thing is a way of disarming the opposition. It's a three-step process. Obama cries, and he cries because he's turning the emotional pitch all the way up to 11 on the spinal tap scale. He's turning it all the way up to 11. And then if you say this is a cynical play in order to gain the sympathy of a certain segment of the vote, then they say you're callous, right? So that's the entire logic. He cries and says you're callous. You say, well, you're crying because you're manipulative, and he says, well, you only think that because you're callous. If you had a heart, you'd agree with me. It's a really sophisticated emotional game, but this is the way our politics, unfortunately, now works.
Yeah. He didn't cry after the San Bernardino terrorist attack that murdered Americans. He didn't cry after Benghazi. In fact, he hopped on a plane to Las Vegas for fundraising. He didn't cry after, let's say, the Paris terrorist attacks. He often goes golfing. He's bloodless in so many ways. They call him no drama Obama. He's cold-blooded. This was acting, and it's a symbiosis, funny enough, because I think the NRA has never been stronger. Gun rights, in many ways, have never been stronger. I think gun ownership in America is an all-time high because of what Obama's doing, his threats, his manipulations, but so far without real law. Last point to you, Ben.
Yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, there's a reason I'm going to go on Sunday and I'm going to go buy an AR-15 if I can get one. I think that all my friends are, too. Anybody who owns stock in gun manufacturers has to be thrilled at President Obama and his narcissism. The president mentioned himself 77 times in that 32-minute speech because, as always, it's all about the Messiah.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? I want to throw one last word in. I told you you'd get the last word, but I want to throw one last thing at you, Ben, and you answer this. I was looking at the news out of the cities of Cologne, Hamburg, and Stuttgart, Germany, where there were swarmings of hundreds, and in Cologne up to 1,000 Muslim refugees in the downtown square on New Year's Eve, mass sexual assaults, including rape. And I look at the helplessness of ordinary Germans in countries where they have extremely strict gun control across Europe. And I look at this same president's response to San Bernardino, where he went into the Oval Office for only the third time in his presidency, and he spent more time calling for American gun control than he did condemning terrorism. And I think in the backdrop of all of this, Americans, and I think some Canadians, are thinking, well, the president won't actually protect us from real threats. We see that these real threats exist in places like Germany, and how helpless the population is there because they're unarmed. I think that's in the background here, Ben, is that we see a new threat coming, not just with ISIS over there, but now ISIS and Muslim migrants over here. And this president won't protect us from them, and he wants to disarm us so we can't protect ourselves. Is that a psychology that you detect out there, Ben?
No question. I mean, we're also afraid, obviously, of homegrown Islamic terrorism in the United States and the importation of people from countries that we can't vet. I mean, this is a serious problem, and the president has been systematically undermining police departments, undermining the military, and then inviting people to the White House if he feels that they have been victims of Islamophobia, like Clockboy Ahmed over in Texas. So if you're a law-abiding American citizen and you're rightly worried about the prospect of Islamic terror on American soil, what resources do you have? I mean, I'll tell you this: I'm as an Orthodox Jew and somebody who wears a yarmulke around everywhere, I feel relatively frightened now, but certainly more frightened than I was when George W. Bush was president, because the president of the United States does not seem to be making protection against Islamic terror a top priority. He's making his top priority taking away my ability to carry a gun.
Yeah. Well, Ben, don't go to Paris. Let me tell you, I spent a few days there after the recent terrorist attacks. Half the people I spoke to in some of the Muslim neighborhoods said, well, the Jews did it. It's incredible, and I think that's coming to the United States or Canada if we don't change course. You've been very generous with your time. We've been talking with Ben Shapiro of the Daily Wire, one of the smartest guys in the business. Ben, thanks so much. Look forward to talking to you again one day.
Thanks so much.
Folks, stick around. After the break, we talk about Uber and their fights in Toronto and Montreal with a critic of Uber, an advocate for taxis. Stay with us. That's after the break.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know the Rebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to therebel.media/store to find out more.
Welcome back to the program. We talk about Uber a lot on this show. It's the ride-sharing app, basically letting you hire a car through your cell phone and track it as it comes to you and know the name and face of your driver before you get in and know exactly how much you're going to pay. And during critical times like New Year's Eve, you can agree to pay 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 times the normal price to pull more cabbies onto the street. Surge pricing. It's the free market. Well, a lot of folks don't like that if they're in the taxi business. And we're joined by my old friend Alex Pierson now, the spokesperson for Co-op Cabs in Toronto. Great to see you again, Alex.
Very good to see you.
You know, I miss you from our Sun News days.
Yeah.
You are a spokesperson for Co-op Cabs, which is obviously having their business really
decimated.
Yeah,
Yep.
I can imagine. Tell me, other than pure self-interest, what is the policy case or the logical case, the political case against Uber from your client's point of view?
Well, it comes down to, let's look at it as a pirate company where they just kind of came into the marketplace and started gaining market share because they had absolutely no rules to follow. So they were able to set their prices and make whatever kind of business decisions they wanted, whether it be insurance, where they get their cars serviced, what kind of cars are used, etc. And they've been able to do that, and they've been able to gain a huge market share simply by not having any rules in place at all.
Well, surely there are some rules in place. The
not
rules
for them.
Of the, there's no rules
not
at all.
For Uber.
Not a single rule at all.
They have found a loophole within the city bylaws that allows them to essentially run their business as they see fit, which is fine.
Now you say insurance. What do you mean by no insurance?
Well,
don't
they
all drivers
say
have insurance?
They say that they have insurance policies in place, but they've never shown anybody. And cabs across the city have to have a $12,000 to $13,000 commercial insurance policy in place. That puts them at a distinct disadvantage if they're trying to compete with a Uber or an Uber X. It's more specific Uber X, let's say, where they can set their prices at whatever they want because they don't have these huge overhead costs that they have to pay.
Isn't the real overhead cost that regular taxis pay, isn't it the taxi medallions, the super inflated prices for those licenses, $200,000, $300,000, that really you could get one for $100 back in the day if you were lucky enough, but now that's really the cost for cabbies. It's not, I mean, I don't believe that a $40 billion company like Uber doesn't have insurance. It doesn't make sense to me. They could it's not like they couldn't afford it. But isn't the real problem that the taxis are laboring under those old bad rules? Not that someone comes in with new, fresh, free market approach?
Well, there are a couple of issues, and this is not a Toronto-specific issue. This is a global issue.
In Montreal, they're planning on blocking bridges. The taxi drivers are so mad.
In Montreal, South Africa, China, all over the world.
We've seen people in Ottawa smash cars with sticks.
Well, that's
crazy.
that's the taxi versus.
That's like a three-way fight.
It is, but it's also airport taxis.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other ballgame. But the point is, taxis are very protective of their grounds, and they want to be able to compete. Our position at Co-op is that Uber's not going anywhere. It shouldn't have to. It's a technology, people like it, but there's two playing fields right now. And in order for a Co-op or other taxis to compete, all we're saying is level the playing field, which
so what
means
rules
well, we'd like less rules.
Like what rules do you want?
Make sure that everyone. Well, first of all, where you get your car service. The city tells you exactly where you get your car service, what kind of car you can drive, how often you have to replace that car, cameras in the car, which we happen to think is a good safety that would be in place, but insurance. The city essentially sets all the rules.
So you're saying you want fewer rules on cabs. Do you want more rules on Uber also?
Specifically insurance, to make sure that they too have to have.
Is that the only thing?
Well,
I don't believe that Uber is uninsured. It would boggle my mind. I mean, what insurance company would want to insure Uber and get that contract?
Well, the insurance companies across the board, I've talked to several, they don't actually have policy plans in place. They're coming around to it, but there is no policy you can get an insurance company right now that says I'm a ride shark.
Maybe they're self-insured.
But I can't
You're
use
a
my
$40 billion
car.
company. You can pay out $1,000 here, $100,000 there. I mean, they're really the fastest growing startup in history.
They are, but here I had a driver come to me and say that he got into a really bad accident. His car was demolished. He was hurt really badly, and he was reliant. He was an Uber X driver, and he said, I expected that Uber would come to me and protect me with the policy. But when I told him I couldn't drive and I had no car left, well, where were they? They said that they weren't responsible for it. So there is a gray area that they've been operating
So this
under.
driver didn't have any insurance
He was
at
not
all.
covered. He was dropped by his insurance company.
Okay.
And Wawanesa, a big insurance carrier, they've now started telling people, if you're operating a ride share, we will not cover you. So
Let's
I'm not
put aside the insurance question, because I understand a lot of people said, hey, Uber, show us the policy. So there is an information gap there, but putting that aside, I don't believe that the central objection to Uber by the cabs is the insurance question.
Well, it's a big one, because that's $12,000. It's a huge commercial insurance cost.
That's nothing compared to the $300,000 for the medallion. I think what's happened here, I mean, you talked about a pirate company coming in, knocking everything over and shaking things up. That's called the free market. That's what the BlackBerry was, and then Apple was to BlackBerry, and the next thing will be, that's innovation. But
they're not held to task or held to account. Like the city or the province, the feds aren't coming in and telling those companies, here's what you have to do. Unlike the taxi industry, there are lots of problems within the taxi industry. There have been customer service relations problems. There are issues with the cab industry that they themselves have to deal with.
The way I see this is the same way as, say, the dairy monopoly. It's a cozy system. You get your quotas. It's like a medallion, and everyone gets rich as a little oligopoly. And we can't break out of that dairy monopoly, so customers have to pay twice as much for milk and cheese in Canada as they do in the States. Taxis had the same thing, an inside clique, everyone getting rich off the backs of customers and drivers too. And now, lucky for the world, someone can bust up that oligopoly, and it's Uber. I mean, I see Uber as liberating Canadians from those dumb rules. You're saying let's get the politicians to liberate Canadians too. Would you be okay with the only rule being in place that you have to have insurance? Is that your only rule you want?
Well, my personal feelings aside, the insurance one probably is the biggest. I think for co-op, it would be minimized. Take the handcuffs off the cab industry and let them compete with Uber, and let the customer decide which car they want to get into. The insurance would be a huge one. So if they can get the insurance where they're both having to pay the same kinds of insurance costs, that would be a huge, huge step.
All right, you're saying it's huge. You take $12,000, you divide it by 300 days a year. What's that, $40 a day? That's like one ride to the airport. I don't think that's a deal breaker, and that's as I say, trivial compared to the cost of medallions. Other than insurance,
but you're talking about the top level. The drivers you're seeing on the street, the everyday cab driver, they're not making tons of money.
I know,
These are
they're paying
everyday.
They're paying co-op cabs. How many medallions does co-op own?
I don't know.
Dozens.
I have no idea. That's not something that I would
People
know.
who drive cabs, the cab is the crummiest, cheapest part of the operation. The medallion's worth $250,000. They're driving a $40,000 car. I think that Uber, for whatever their flaws, and I don't work for them. I'm not a lobbyist for them. I'm sure they have flaws. I'm sure they do things wrong. But for all their flaws, they have done what
they've woken the market up.
Yeah.
100%, and they're not going anywhere, and nor should they have to. Uber offers a service people like. From the cab side of things, fine, they'll stay. But level the playing field. Take some of the regulations off. Let a cab driver decide what kind of car they want. Let them decide what kind of training they want to do. Let them decide what kind of service or where they should go to get their car taken care of. Let the cabs have less rules. Put some rules, minimal rules on Uber and the cabs, and let the customer decide who they want.
Well,
Maybe the best
Alex,
cab.
You've always been one of my favorite people since back of the sun. I love your approach. If that's truly the approach of your cab company, I mean, hopefully that, I don't know what other cab
I
companies
can't
think.
speak for any other. It's a big battle.
Yeah,
My
is.
biggest criticism would be that the bureaucrats, the city, is just moving so slowly.
They benefit too. If they don't get to regulate, they'll find other work in the public sector. Well, let me close on this. I hope that a new company comes forward that is an Uber for healthcare. and busts up the monopoly and the oligopoly and the rules and the bureaucracies, and does to our bureaucratic healthcare system, liberates patients the same way Uber has liberated the cab industry. And I hope that your requests are met, that we get rid of these ridiculous rules, and those bureaucrats at City Hall have to find something else. Great to see you again, my friend.
Nice to see you.
You keep up the fight. Folks, stay with us. After the break, I'll read your letters to me.
Ontario residents are being hosed on electricity prices. The latest Auditor General's report says we've been overcharged by $37 billion over the last several years. That works out to nearly $2,800 for every man, woman, and child. Why? Mismanagement and bad policy choices from the Ontario Liberals. It's going to cost us billions more in coming years. Energy Minister Bob Chiarelli won't take responsibility. He's lashing out. It's time for Bob to go. If you agree, go to firebob.ca. That's firebob.ca and make your voice heard.
Welcome back. My favorite part of the show, your viewer feedback. Sam writes about the terrible violence in Cologne. He says, good job reporting on what is happening in Germany. The CBC gave that same story about 10 seconds on the National. I have a feeling that sometime this year the media will finally turn against the refugees. This will only go to prove that the rebel got it right before everybody else. Well, I agree with you that the media in Canada has buried the story. Very short clip on the National, and this morning there was nothing on the website until I sort of poked and prodded the CBC, and then they said, oh, okay, we better put some token story on the website. So yes, they're definitely downplaying it because it contradicts the narrative. The official narrative is that, oh, these refugees are cute little kids, they're just harmless little lambs, and are you heartless? Why wouldn't you take them? When in fact, in reality, at least in Europe, up to 81% of the Muslim migrants, well, first of all, they're not refugees. Second of all, they are young men. Precisely the young Muslim men who rioted, raped, and sexually assaulted in Cologne. So that is against the narrative. That's why they're not writing it. But I disagree with your conclusion that they will one day wake up to it. No. Don't you see that as things get worse and worse, the 4P professionals, the police, the politicians, the professors, and the press will dig in harder and harder and harder to try and reconcile their multicultural dream with reality. They'll block things out. We saw that with the Justice Minister of Germany saying, oh, no, this has nothing to do with refugees. It's organized crime. Yeah, that's it. No, it's not. So I disagree. The media, their whole worldview is invested in multiculturalism, open borders, and you have nothing to fear from radical Islam. And rape culture and sexism, that's just a white male thing in college fraternities in North America, certainly not from these horny 20-something misogynist Muslim migrants. So I disagree with you when you think that the media will wake up. Adam writes, Ezra, I have the utmost respect for you after watching a number of your videos and read articles. I must say that you and your team do homework above and beyond your competitors. Keep up the good work. Well, thanks very much. I mean, we try our best. We have a small team. We certainly don't have the budget. I mean, I'd like to point out that here at, when we were at the Sun News Network, our entire year's budget was precisely 1 week's budget at the CBC. Well, here at the Rebel, our year's budget is about a week's that of the Sun. I got to check those numbers. We are such a tiny fraction, so we do our best with our small resources, but it's all thanks to you, our viewers, for chipping in. So thank you for that. And finally, some not-so-fan mail from Yan, who writes, you are not real rebels. You are cheap fear-mongerers using emotional blackmail to get people charged up and wanting to fight. If you had any real humanity and courage, you might find it more rebellious to name names of people funding ISIS, find the real existence for ISIS, etc., do a little research, make real compelling headlines, show yourself that you have brains for a reason. Okay, Yan, well, first of all, I would say we have looked at the funding of ISIS several times in several ways. One of the ways they make money, it used to be $3 million a day, now it's about $1 million a day, still a lot of money, is from contraband oil sales. They pump oil, they put it in trucks, and they drive it across the border to Turkey, where it's sold on the black market. Turkey allows this. That is a major source of revenue for ISIS. the Islamic State. Of course, other ways are they actually tax the land that they control. They have millions of people, 10 million people under their jurisdiction, and they extract taxes. And finally, of course, we know that there are millionaire or billionaire princes and ayatollahs and mullahs in Saudi Arabia and Qatar that fund terrorism, just like there are in Iran that fund different terrorists too. So that's the funding. We talk about it a lot. I don't think we're being fake rebels. Let me close with this thought. When I say that we're rebels, we're rebelling against the other media. We're rebelling against their mob mentality and their groupthink. We're rebelling against the old technology of regular TV that's in decline. We're rebelling against the regulators and the censors, both in the old TV industry, like the CRTC, and just basically political correctness in general. And we're rebelling in that we're conservative. We're about the only conservative voice left in Canada. I think we're rebels. And Yan, let me tell you this. Don't lose the passion. Keep watching our channel. I don't mind that you disagree, because that's part of freedom too. Hey everybody, if you want to send me a letter, send it to Ezra@therebel.media. Facebook us or Twitter us on these contacts on the screen. And hey, that's it for today. Keep fighting for freedom. We'll see you tomorrow.